Morning. Good to see everybody here. Well, not everybody. Some of us are still at home, no place. Today we are on track. We're going through the whole book of Genesis. This year we're going to do right up to the end. And basically, we're focusing on the life of Jacob. And as you can see, what Genesis 12 onwards does is that it tracks the life of three of the patriarchs: Abraham, now Jacob, and then Joseph, and how God's promises to redeem the world start is incepted in chapter 12, and then how it actually grows to fruition to the rest of Genesis. So we look at Jacob's dream. Now, if you remember, last week he did a nasty thing. He basically swindled his brother out of the blessing. And today we're going to look at the consequences of that. So let's start with a word of prayer. Lord, we ask that you speak to us today, that you open up our hearts, our minds to your spirit, that we may see what you see and feel what you feel. And that will be our driving force for the way we live. We ask for Jesus' sake. Amen. Right, so basically, again, to make things simple, 3 points for this particular passage that we learn. We learn a lot about God. Firstly, that God comes to us when we are at our lowest. Secondly, God's blessings and promises are actually inseparable. And thirdly, God's transformation enables us to receive his blessings. All right, so let's start off with God coming to us when we are at our lowest. Now, last time our story was left where there was great trouble after Jacob had swindled his brother. All hell broke loose. And then Jacob had to leave. He was warned by his mother to leave because of the fury of his brother. Jacob left Beersheba and went towards Haran. And he came to a certain place and stayed there that night because the sun had set. Taking one of the stones of the place, he put it under his head and lay down in that place to sleep. Now, why was he running away? If you look in chapter 27, that Esau hated Jacob because of the blessing with which his father had blessed him. And Esau said to himself, "The days of mourning for my father are approaching, then I will kill my brother." So that actually split the family into two. Jacob faced great danger, and the rest of the passage will describe how his mother sought to protect him. Go to my brother's house, which is basically Padam Aram up north, to basically not only to find a wife, which part of the people God has chosen, the family God has chosen, but also to escape from his brother. And now he is lying under the starry night that night. Can I have the music on, please? Right? It started out very well. The plan, as someone said, according to plan. Everything fell into place. He got the blessing. He won the victory. And yet he's alone. No house, no servants, no money. Heading out, running away for the rest of his life. And this is the part of his life which is basically the lowest because he's alone. Again. And it seems as if you read the Bible, there's so many instances in our lives where when we are lowest is when God actually comes to us. Some of us think that when we're up, when life is good, when our job doing well, we got a bonus, and God is with us. Not necessarily so. Look at Job. It takes 40 chapters of suffering before God actually speaks to Job. 40 chapters. The rest of the time, he lost his family, he lost his wealth, he lost his health. You look at a man born blind, 40 years of his life, couldn't see a single glint of light until that day when Jesus touched his heart, opened up his eyes. The point when you are at the lowest, when there's no hope, that's where God comes in. Or Joseph, the lowest part of his life, in prison, falsely accused by Potiphar, and then God comes into his life. And I think for many of us, being the lowest point of our lives is actually when God is nearest to us. You see, we won't listen when we're up. If you look at Job, he says, he catches the wise with their own craftiness, and the schemes of the wily are brought to a quick end. So when we're crafty, when we're depending on our own wisdom and our own strength, we won't listen. We only listen when we're down. Look at Paul. Paul uses these words in Job to describe, let no one deceive himself. If anyone among you thinks he's wise in this age, let him become a fool that he may become wise. For the wisdom of the world is folly with God, for it's written, he catches the wise in their craftiness. And again, God knows the thoughts of the wise, that they are futile. See, salvation is proven to be unmistakably God's when it actually comes to the point where we are lowest and that our own resources are inadequate to the task. Look at the Philippian jailer. Moments before, he's laughing and sneering at Paul and Silas as they're singing hymns and songs and what this fellow doing. Nowhere near salvation, right? But when the earthquake comes and the chains fall off, he rushes in with trembling and fear. He fell down before Paul and Silas, and then he brought them out. Sirs, what must I do to be saved? See, God comes to us when we're lowest. And this is the lowest point of Jacob's life, so that when God comes to him, it is unmistakable evidence of grace. Not that Jacob deserved it, but God gave him grace. If you look at Ecclesiastes chapter 3, for there's a season, a time for every matter under the sun, under heaven, time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant, time to pluck up what is planted, a time to kill, a time to heal, a time to break down, a time to build up, a time to weep, a time to laugh, a time to mourn, and a time to dance. And it would seem as if life has the storms and the quiet periods. And sometimes we think in our lives that this is where we belong. We belong to the in-between period, and we don't want to leave that part. And then we actually get into a storm. We start to question, was the blessing real? Did I play my cards right? Was there another way? And or suffering is only for bad people, and am I bad? That's why I'm suffering. This is an interesting article out in CNN just a couple of days ago, where there's a man dying called Alan Croc in Dijon, northeast France. He wanted to use Facebook for another use. He wanted to live stream his death to show the suffering, and he wanted euthanasia. And his reason is that God is love, and God will not let his people suffer unnecessarily. You see, we choose to see God on our own terms. That's why we cannot accept suffering. And he wanted to persuade the French president to allow him to be euthanized, because we see God on our own terms, and surely God doesn't want us to suffer, isn't it? Suffering cannot be part of the plan. Now, suffering shows up where our treasure is. If you look in Psalm 39, when you discipline a man with rebukes for sin, You consume like a moth what is dear to him, and surely all mankind is a mere moth. See, when suffering comes, we're at the lowest point of our lives, it's like a moth. You go open your cupboard, and suddenly your best clothes, your best dress, your best suit has a big hole there you can't wear it. And you feel devastated. Suffering shows where our treasure is. We either get mad or we get sad. If our treasure is in whatever's taken away, we get mad because God must hate us or we hate him back. He's not really our God. Or we feel sad. I thought I could trust God and God has let me down. So this is how Satan assaults the glory of God in our lives. He uses either pleasure or pain. When pain comes, you either think God is powerless. Why should I worship such a God? Or God doesn't care for me. That's why this pain has come into my life. And the other thing is that he can even use pleasure, because when pleasure comes, God is therefore unnecessary. Now, God's blessings and God's promises are inseparable. If you look here, let's read. As he dreamed, and behold, there was a ladder set up on the earth, and on top of it reached heaven. And behold, the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. And behold, the Lord stood above it and said, I am the Lord, the God of Abraham, your father, and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie, I will give to you and your offspring. Your offspring shall be like the dust of the earth, and you shall spread abroad to the west and to the east and to the north and to the south. And in you and your offspring shall all the families of the earth be blessed. Behold, I am with you and will keep you wherever you go and will bring you back to this land. For I will not leave you until I've done what I've promised to you. This is Jacob's dreams. And dreams are very important. If you look into the Bible, there are about 130 references where God speaks to his people via dreams. In fact, Jacob himself has 8 dreams or visions or revelations of God. Some people said dreams are anticipation of what you want to do in the future. Abraham Lincoln actually had a dream. 2 weeks before he was assassinated, he woke up in his room, walked out, wandered around his house, and wound up back in his room, wondering, why are there people crying? And as he walked back in his room, he saw a picture of himself. He saw himself lying there, and people crying because he was shot. And sure enough, 2 weeks later, he was shot. In fact, the New Yorker came up with an article a couple of months ago. It says it is in dreams that Americans are making sense of Donald Trump. And there was a lady who collected 3,000 dreams from all people all over the country. And even one of them had a dream where Donald Trump is descending from heaven on a golden staircase, and he will be here to save the world. Another one by a mega church pastor called Tynan describes the situation when he goes to the White House and is confronted by 2 either security guards or they are angels. They're 8 foot tall. And after going through layers and layers of security, he finally meets President Trump, who has grown to 8 foot tall. And the refrain of that comes up from behind is, protect the heavenly deposit, protect President Trump. So people when we get in the situation of anxiety, we try to make sense of our lives, and often it comes out in dreams. The last time there was a huge writing of dreams was actually under Hitler. These are called the Third Reich of dreams, where Charlotte Berard actually correlated a lot of dreams that came up in the country of Germany when Hitler was ruling. Now, here we have a dream, and dream is of the staircase, the ladder set up on earth and to the top of it reaching heavens. It actually is not really a ladder. You could actually translate this or interpret this as a staircase that goes up to heaven, and behold, the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. Basically, the dream tells him about divine presence and mediation. If you look at the staircase, it's no different from, in scientific terms, a portal. You see all those scientific movies, you go from one dimension to another by going through a portal. Or if you're more simplistic, if you look at C.S. Lewis' writings, The Lion, the Witch, the Wardrobe, Lucy opens up the door in the cupboard, and when you walk inside, you go into another realm, as it were. I remember this Iraqi pilot who was a patient of mine. and he's not a Christian, and he actually had a very severe bladder cancer, and he was supposed to be in Vancouver having his surgery done. We sent him there because he was a Canadian citizen, and just the night before he actually had his surgery done, which would have removed his bladder and replaced it with bowel, massive surgery, he heard a voice, and he actually had a dream, and he got up in his dream to the balcony, and the dream said to him, don't go for surgery tomorrow. That's amazing. This guy is not a Christian. I was wondering who spoke to me like that. I mean, why is it shining? What is it light and all that? And he actually flew all the way back to Kuala Lumpur and to see me. And he said, look, this voice told me that the cancer's gone. And I come back to check. So he came back. We actually put a telescope in his bladder, and the cancer was gone, absolutely gone. And I can testify to it. In fact, I took some biopsies because I don't believe. And it was gone. And it gave an opportunity for him to ask me, who is the fellow who told me this? And it was the voice of Jesus. And he subsequently came to know Christ, lost his family because they are of a different religion. And there was trouble in his life, but he came to know Christ. And that is some of the times that God speaks to us in dreams. And I want to look at this very carefully. And behold, he dreamt, and behold, there was a ladder set up on earth, and the top of it reached to heaven. The same words are used in Genesis chapter 11 when they said, come, let us build a city and tower with a top in heaven. Let us make a name for ourselves. You see, the language is the same, written by the same author, trying to tell you that on one way, God can come to you, or the other way, they try to find God on their own terms. There is a difference. If you look at the ziggurats of that particular time, they're all like ladders or staircases. They're all an effort for man to find God, but to find God on their own terms. That is the problem with Jacob and with the rest of us. We try to find God on our own terms. And here we have God coming. God comes and stood above it. And he said, I'm the Lord, the God of Abraham, your father, and God of Isaac, the one you tried to swindle. Very embarrassing situation there. The land on which you lie, I will give to you and all your offspring, which is the restoration of his terrible situation, a restoration of his fortune. And if you remember, Isaac was a rich man. I mean, you look at Genesis 26, Isaac sowed in that land and reaped in the same year 100-fold. The Lord blessed him. The man became rich and gained more and more until he became very wealthy. And he had possessions and flocks and herds and many servants, so that the Philistines envied him. Jacob lost all of that. It's all under Esau because Esau grabbed it. He may have swindled him, but he had to run for his life. And God is telling him, you will receive it all back. Your offspring will be like the dust of the earth, and you will spread abroad to the west and to the east, to the north and the south, and in you and all your offspring shall all the families of the earth be blessed. And if you look at the patriarch Abraham and the patriarch Jacob, when God spoke to Abraham, he was married and childless. Jacob is in the worst situation. When God spoke to him, he was penniless, he was alone, unmarried, and no child. Now, the tale of two presidents. Now, I want to talk to you about what we live for. You see, God's promises, God's blessing comes in the terms of promises. Promises are something that sometimes you can't touch, you can't feel, you can't grab. There was a very interesting article last week in Atlantic where President Trump, very embarrassed because many of his aides shared that when he was supposed to visit a World War I grave in France, he said he wouldn't go because the whole grave is full of losers. Losers are people who die for their country. They're suckers. And then the story was told in this article of when he was at the gravesite with his then Chief of Staff, John Kelly, whose son was an officer who was killed in the war. He looked at John Kelly and he said to him, I don't get it. What was it in? What was it in for them? I mean, which means the guy's dead, your son is dead. Why did he do it? What was it in it for him? And that's the kind of transactional, I mean, it's very natural for Trump to say that because he's like a lot of people. In fact, some Americans get very upset about Trump, but they don't realize that Trump is actually a symptom of their country's disease. Trump is not the cause of your pain. Trump is your worst nightmare come real because the country is like that. He's just reflecting a portion of the population. When you become transactional in your life, the previous president was great. I was watching a movie on his last year in office, and he was in Vietnam. And when he was in Vietnam, he was actually meeting with a bunch of young people who were basically leaders, teenagers, the best and brightest. And then one of the Vietnamese students stood up and said, look, we are leaders, but you are a great leader. How can you teach us how to be great leaders? Obama taught for a while, and he said, sometimes we think people are incentivized by concrete things like money and power. But sometimes people are also incentivized by a good story, which means it's not something you can touch and feel. It's a good story. And we in America, we have a good story. We have a Declaration of Independence in which we declare that all men are created equal and endowed by the Creator with inalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Obama said we all need a larger narrative of life beyond the concrete terms of what's in it for me. Power and money to live, to become great, to become what we actually are meant to be. But the trouble is, the movie that chronicled the last year of Obama's presidency had focused on John Kerry, Stephanie Powers, Ben Rhodes, and Obama, how they tried to change the world. You should see their face when Trump won the election. Long drop to the floor. All their dreams were shattered, and actually Trump reversed a lot of what they did. And is still trying to reverse it. That's the trouble. It's okay to have a good story, but it won't last. We actually have a wider story. You know what our story is? It's told to Apostle John, Revelations chapter 9-7. After this I looked, and behold, a great multitude that no one could number, from every nation, from all tribes and peoples and languages, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed in white robes, with palm branches in their hands, and crying out with a loud voice, salvation belongs to our God who sits on the throne and to the Lamb. You see, that's a vision that will come true. That's the larger story for which we should focus our lives on. You know, there's some billionaires who have done that in terms of living beyond themselves, not just a concrete term, all the money I have. You have to look at Bill Gates and Melinda and Warren Buffett. They've given a large portion of their wealth to a cause larger than themselves. After all, they got all the money and all the power. The only thing I'm disappointed with is the guy who we give a lot of money to, Jeff Bezos, 160 billion, and he only gives 0.09% of his wealth. Now, if you don't give your wealth away, what happens is that your wife has a big smile because she got $38 billion reward. Divorce. And the lesson is, what you don't give away will be taken away. Either your wife takes it away, or when you die, God takes it away. You see, you have to learn to live for a bigger cause. If you look in the scheme of Genesis, there are promises given to Abraham. Land in chapter 13, and land and nation promise in 15 and 17, and then chapter 22, land, nation, blessings. And in chapter 21, Isaac is born. That's a tangible evidence of the blessing of the promise. And then chapter 23, Abraham dies, and his blessing is actually what? The promise, because he only got a plot of land. The only plot of land is the cave. And if you look at Jacob's life, when he died, most of his family were living where? Egypt. And he came back to one miserable plot of land. And so God's blessings and God's promises are actually inseparable. The blessing is the promise. And to be able to enable and appropriate that blessing, you actually have to learn to believe in that promise, have faith in that promise, and appropriate the entailments of that promise into your life. Otherwise, your life has no meaning. Why do we have soaring dreams? Martin Luther King, wishing or praying and dreaming about equality, or Elon Musk, who wants to basically reach for the skies. You see, because God has put eternity in our hearts. If you look at Ecclesiastes chapter 3, the same chapter, what gain is the worker from his toil? I've seen the business that God has given to the children of men to be busy with. He has put everything beautiful. He made everything beautiful in his time. He has put eternity into the hearts of men's hearts. See, we reach for the skies. We want to live for larger stories because God has put eternity in our hearts. And if we don't live for that vision, we will never be satisfied. Chapter 28, verse 15, and God says to Abraham, to Jacob, behold, I'm with you and will keep you, and wherever you go, and will bring you back to this land. For I will not leave you until I have done what I've promised you. And here he promises Jacob, it doesn't matter about the land. You see, the blessing is, I'm going to be with you. You're going to see tangible evidence. In fact, I'm going to be with you. I'm going to bring you all the way. Wherever you go, it doesn't depend on promised land anymore. It depends on my promised presence in your life. And so therefore, we have a choice to take God's promises to us today as his blessing. Do we live like President Trump and ask, what's in it for me? Or do we live for a larger dream which God puts in our hearts, which is the dream that one day we will walk hand in hand with every race on the face of the earth, on all peoples, all tribes, and be part of that larger mission to bring the gospel, to bring life to the world. Lastly, God transforms us to receive his blessings. He doesn't just dump the blessing on you. You need to be transformed. And if you look at Jacob's response, it's transactional. If you look at Jacob made a vow, look, if God will be with me, then he'll keep me in the way that I should go and give me a bread to eat and clothing to wear, so that I come again to my father's house, and then God shall be my God. And in this stone which I've set up for a pillar shall be God's house. And of all that you give me, I will give you 1/10. Oh, very generous, right? If God. You see, it's transactional. If you look at God, what he says, and you put Jacob, what he says, next to each other. God says, the land on which you lie, I will give to your offspring. Your offspring shall be like the dust of the earth. You shall spread abroad to the west, to the east, the north. Your offspring shall be all the families of earth be blessed. Behold, I am with you and will keep you wherever you go. I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done what I've promised. Unconditional, isn't it? You look at Jacob's side, if God will be with me, then God shall be. I will give you 10%. Sounds like a deal, a bill project, isn't it? And you kick back 10%, right? And the guy actually gives you all, and you kick back 10%. Very, very big. And Jacob's response is self-centered. You look at his response. Jacob's expectations of God's promises. If God will be with me, give me food, good food, beef noodle outside today, clothes, and I return safely to my father's house. He's not interested in the bigger vision. And his promises, God will be my God, recognition of his house, etc. You see, how God will use him as a blessing to others, the land, for his offspring spread like dust, as a blessing to the whole families. He's not interested. All that, not important. Jacob is like a Trump man, What's in it for me? I can see, I can feel, I can touch. That's what I'm interested in. He's not interested in the bigger picture. His response is self-centered. And he's also presumptuous and manipulative. You think you're 10% very big. I think often we come to God and we promise him our 10% or our commitment, It actually betrays a sense that we are presumptuous and manipulative, as if your 10% will coerce God to do things for you. Not very much different when I was in Tokyo some time ago. I think Yiden will recognize this temple, all right, in Tokyo. Yeah, and then very interesting, the Japanese people. And if you go inside, you can see things like this. If you want good health, it's only 500 yen, which is like Malaysian ringgit, like $30, something like that. And if you want a traffic safety, because Tokyo is a real difficult place to navigate, it's 1,000 yen. If you want education and learning, only 500. Your pass exam, 1,000 yen. Now that one always gets him. It's a transactional kind of faith that you give God something, then God will give you something else. It's very natural. If you look at the story of Jesus and the 10 lepers in Luke chapter 17, remember 10 lepers, and being a leper, they're basically totally ostracized. Nobody wants to look at you. See, a guy with the leprosy, his nose hanging off and all the skin lesions, you run away. Totally ostracized, and they were crying out, and then Jesus came. And Jesus actually healed all 10 of them. But you know what? Only one came back. You see, all of them had a surface need. All of them were sick, ostracized at the lowest point of their lives. That's a surface need. Loneliness, anxiety, illness. But only one came back. And the fellow who came back was a Samaritan. He wasn't even a Jew. The surface need is designed to point you to a deeper need, a real need. And that real need is for a Savior. And the problem is we are also focused on our surface needs. Because you know why? Our faith is like Jacob's, it's transactional. It's like Trump, what's in it for me? And once that surface need is met, I don't have to go back because I got what I wanted, right? And the trouble is, you miss the point. The point is that the surface needs points to the real need. Sometimes we're so distracted by our surface needs that the perseveration and the focus on surface needs so fills our life that we fail to see the direct need of our lives. You look at the parable of the story of the feeding of 5,000. And here we have Jesus giving free buffet lunch. 5,000 men. You count the women and children, it comes to about 20,000. John chapter 6. So they all came, they have big makan. Their makan is like buffet until so much left behind. And then this is what Jesus said. Truly, I say to you, you are seeking me not because you saw the signs, but because you ate your fill of the loaves. The people were there, you know what? They're all interested, like, what's in it for me? Because they wanted to fill their stomachs. And he said to them, do not work for the food that perishes, but for the food that endures to eternal life, which the Son of Man will give to you. For on him the Father has set a seal. Jesus is saying, you came here for the makan, but I want you to look deeper. Something else deeper. And he said to them, I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me shall not hunger, and whoever believes in me shall not thirst. But the trouble is, they didn't want that. If you look in their lives, and many of them heard it, they said, this is a hard saying. Who can listen to it? And after this, many of the disciples turned away and no longer walked with him. 20,000 people there, how many left behind? 12. Very poor church person, right? If I were pastor, mati like that. Only 12 left. Your big rally, you fed so many people. Well, I spent call Lee Oriental, we feed 20,000 people, only 12 came back. We are total failure. Isn't that right? Or look at what F.F. Bruce wrote. What they wanted, he would not give. And what he offered, they would not receive. See, that's the problem with the world that we face today. The surface needs that we have, what we need from God, either the exam or basically the illness to be healed, all that can actually be a distraction. So that the real need for which the surface need points to is actually is missed and you're distracted. What about the story in John 11 about Lazarus who was healed? Jesus found out, someone told him that Lazarus was sick, very badly ill, probably had a heart attack or something. All right? And Jesus didn't go immediately. You see, Jesus loved Martha and sister Lazarus. And when he heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place that he was. If Jesus loved you, he'll stay back longer. He won't come immediately, right? Imagine you had a doctor in Subang like that. If I love you a lot, church member, First Baptist Church, I think I'll wait 2 more days and I'll see you. Non-church member, I come straight away. Mati lah, like that, isn't it? Why did he say that? Why did he actually purposely wait 2 more days? And when he actually came, Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. That means you came too late, isn't it? You came too late. You should have come earlier. And then Jesus told them plainly, Lazarus has died, and for your sake, I'm glad I'm not there. That you may believe, then let's go to him. So Jesus actually reveals the reason why he actually delays. Because the outcome was just Lazarus is going to die, and that belief in him is more important than our health, our wealth, or well-being. When Jesus heard it, he said, this illness does not lead to death. It is for the glory of God, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it. You see, God's motives in the things that actually happen in our lives are different from our motives. We're so focused on our transactional needs and our surface needs. And that actually distracts us from the real need. The real need in our lives is a larger picture that the Son of God may be glorified. So we actually have a transactional faith or a transformational faith. And although Jacob starts off with a transactional faith, he has got to move to a transformational faith. And for us as a church, we need to do that. I remember the only reason why I went to Christian gatherings when I was 17 years of age is because Scripture Union meetings always had makan. I'm there for the makan. It's a fact. Because of the makan, I became a Christian. That's right. It's called a rice Christian, isn't it? Anytime you want to have a big church, you have free makan lah. They all come. But somewhere down the line, the surface needs actually point to the real needs. That's why people ask me, why this church gives so much free food? I'm not interested in the money. The money God can always give because He owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. I'm interested in all the fellows who come for the surface need. One day, a couple of them will see their real need. And that soul is more valuable to me than all the money you can spend. That is the real motive. Now, the danger of a transactional faith, it is dangerous in the world. We live in a world where everybody is saying, what's in it for me? Because Paul warns Timothy, I understand this, in the last days there will come times of difficulty where people will be lovers of self, lovers of money. And if you go right down the last verse in chapter 4, treacherous, reckless, swollen with conceit, lovers of pleasure rather than the lovers of God. We live in a world today where everybody is saying, what's in it for me? And that's a transactional kind of, and it's dangerous. This is Justin Rosenstein, who basically, if you watched that very good documentary recently called The Social Dilemma, he is actually an inventor of the like button. How many of you know what the like button is? Oh, nobody goes on Facebook. Yeah, the like button is one of the most powerful inventions in the world. Why is it powerful? It's powerful because when people like you, you're happy, right? So when you like me, I have to like you back, right? Right? And then if you go on to a few days without any likes, you feel, what's wrong with me? And basically the whole aim of the game is to get you addicted to the screen. And actually he said, this is one of the 50 people who invented all the social media in the world today that captivates and glues us on to the screen. And he says, we live in why is the environment degrading? Because we live in a world where a dead whale is worth more than a live one. We live in a world where dead trees are worth more than a live one. We live in a world where fake news spreads 6 times faster than real news. That's why. And you know why? Because when you come to social media, our attention can be mined. We're more profitable to the corporation staring at a screen, at an ad for hours than going out to living our lives. See, AI is good. We're all talking about AI, right? The problem with AI is the purpose for which AI is designed. If the design is to mine money from you, then you're finished. In fact, they said, if you go on the website today, and if you don't have to pay for the product, you are the product. Behind you, when you look at the screen, young people, when you look at your smartphones, behind the screen are thousands of very, very smart engineers and supercomputers taking everything that you are and using it for monetary purposes. Why? Because we live in a world where men are lovers of self. We live in a world where everyone is transactional. In fact, it's come into the Christian religion as well. Apostle Leroy Thompson says of Jesus, Jesus took your place in poverty so you can take his place in prosperity. Wow. Paula White, who is basically the pastor for President Trump, is on her website. If you can buy some communion things from her or give money for Passover, he will assign you an angel to yourself, be an enemy to your enemies, give you prosperity, take sickness away, give you a long life, and bring increase in your inheritance. Wow. All you have to do is click, and that's it. You see, do we have a transactional faith? Look in our own lives. Are we angry or disappointed with God when things don't go our way? Is our prayer life dominated by our needs? I think you should actually audio tape your prayer life. If it's all the time on what you need and you really don't spend time on basically worshiping and basking in who He is, then it might be a transactional faith. Or our commitment is leveraged to fulfilling our desires. God, if you give me a raise in my job, then I'll go to church. If you make that most beautiful girl fall in love with me, I promise I give you 10%. Sometimes our commitment is leveraged to fulfill our desires or guilt. You ever wonder if something bad happens to you? That means you haven't done something right. Or you think God demands excellence in all things and you beat yourself up. You're doing instead of being. Or faith becomes a tool. Yes, have you seen people who come to church and say, I'm believing God for a raise. I'm believing God, but my son will got 7 A's. Hey, you're believing a very big deal. You see, your believing in your faith is such a big deal. God isn't the big deal anymore. It's your faith that's a big deal. Listen to your friends in church. The moment is, I'm believing God for this, then you know the fellow has got a transactional faith. Because it is the faith that's important, not the God. You see what I mean? So, and it all assumes you have a co-equal relationship with God where God needs something from you and you can get something back from Him. And that's wrong. In fact, there was an interesting pastor who actually said, when someone asks you, how are you? You know how we should answer? We should answer, it's better than I deserve. Because you're a sinner, horrible sinner, stinking sinner, deserving death and hell. And whatever happens to me, God has treated me better than I deserve. And that actually puts us in our place. So Jacob begins to put down a marker. He made a vow. If God will be with me and keep me in this way, and that I go and give me bread to eat and clothing to wear, and so that I come again to my father's house in peace, and then God shall be my God, and this stone which I have set up for a pillar shall be God's house, and all that you give me, I will give a full tenth to you. And here is a picture of Bethel, a special place. He calls it the Beth-El, which is the house of God. And he transforms him. God goes with him up to his uncle's place. He falls in love with a beautiful Rachel. I said Rebecca. And basically, he goes through a tough time. Because if you think Jacob is a nasty scoundrel, you should meet his uncle. Laban is far worse, 10 times worse than Jacob. And instead of marrying the woman he loves, which is basically Rebecca, or Rachel, sorry, I'm getting all wrong. Rachel, Rebecca, all the R's. All right, getting old. He actually winds up, he's supposed to work 7 years to marry Rachel. And he winds up on the wedding night, the same trick he played on his brother, his uncle played on him. You know what he did for his brother? He went to his father and he dressed up as his brother. So the father felt his hairy skin. Oh, I give you the blessing. Actually, he gave the blessing to Jacob instead. He tricked his father. He swindled his brother. So at the same night, wedding night, he made love to the wrong woman. I cannot understand how that would happen. Maybe he'd switch off the lights. No lights, okay. Hey, in those days, they got torch. Right? So I don't understand how you can make love to the wrong woman. You wait 7 years some more. So that was exactly the same trick his uncle played on him that he played on his father. And you can see how God has a wonderful sense of humor, isn't it? And then to really have the woman he really loved, he worked another 7 years. And on top of that, to have the wealth to bring back to show his father, he has to work another 7 years, 120 years. But God taught him that you cannot have a transactional faith. Because if you want to transact, I'm cleverer than you. God showed that there are a lot of people who are cleverer than you. If you think you can win, you cannot win. And then he wrestles with God, and Brother David Adams will be sharing with us in 2 weeks on that and how God has dealt with him in that. And finally, you go to Genesis chapter 35, Jacob comes back to the promised land transformed, humbler, understanding what God is. And he actually reconciles with Esau finally. And then in chapter 25, God speaks again to Jacob. Arise and go up to Bethel. Remember the same place? Bethel, house of God. And dwell there. Make an altar to God who appeared to you when you fled from your brother Esau. So Jacob said to his household and all who were with him, put away the foreign gods that are among you and purify yourselves and change your garments. So let's arise and go up to Bethel so that I may make an altar to the Lord who answered me on the day of my distress and had been back with me wherever I've gone. So he's going back to the same place under the starry night. He's going back there, and that altar, that stone becomes an altar. So Bethel, that place is about transformation, where the place becomes a shrine, a stone becomes an altar, a fugitive becomes a pilgrim becomes a patriarch, the patriarch becomes a nation becomes the kingdom of God later on. It all starts the starry night, where he made that one little commitment and God came to him. Today I'm going to come to us and end with a challenge. The challenge is to make Jacob's dream our reality. If you look, there's also Jesus. And Jesus said to his disciples, truly I say to you, you will see heaven open and the angels of God ascending and descending on the Son of Man. And now Jesus says, you know the dream that your forefather had, Jacob. He had a dream where there was a staircase. You know the staircase? That's me. That's me. Thousands of years later on, the portal is not a cupboard. The portal is the person of Jesus Christ. And if you go back to Bethel, do you know that Bethel got two names? One is the house of God, Bethel. The other one is called Bethaven, the house of nothingness. Hosea renamed it the house of nothingness. You see, this can be a house of God or house of nothingness, but it depends on your response. You know, there's such a big clamoring for people who have been suppressed. In America, it's Black Lives Matter. I will end with the story of two black women. One lived in Bethel, the other one lived in Bethaven. Her name is Harriet Tubman, and that she's probably going to be the first black person who's going to have a face on the currency. And she writes, every great dream begins with a dreamer. Always remember you have within you the strength, the patience, the passion to reach for the stars, to change the world. Harriet Tubman was a person who had recurrent dreams also, and God spoke to her in dreams. And she actually came to have these dreams because somebody had thrown something at her and it hit her she sustained a brain injury, and she sustained a condition called hypersomnolence, which is always falling asleep. And in her sleep, God often spoke to her. In fact, God spoke to her as a slave that you should escape. And she followed the dream. She actually escaped, but she was caught. But she tried again. And the next time, she actually succeeded walking 90 miles through the forest to freedom. And she spent the rest of her life, you know what she was doing? She was actually organizing repeated trips back into the south to save. She personally saved 70 slaves. She organized and helped slave in total 19 trips down there and saved a total of 300 slaves. And in fact, when they actually had the Emancipation Bill, when the Congress actually declared that slaves were equal and free, and people were celebrating, she wasn't celebrating. You know why? She said, I saw that in a dream 2 years ago. I celebrated 2 years ago. I'm not celebrating now. She walked very closely with God. The other one is Mariah Carey. Sorry. Must be the MCO. Whitney Houston, sorry. Yeah, I was watching Mariah Carey yesterday. Anyway, so Whitney Houston was probably the first black and most successful singer in their history. She actually amassed a fortune of $450 million in those days, which is huge. If you look at her life, she also had a dream. When she was a teenager, she actually came from a church. Her mother, Sissy, was a gospel singer, a very famous gospel singer, who actually never made it to the big leagues, but brought her up well. And she described the film that actually inspired her. The film's name is called Sparkle. It is about three sisters who actually aspired to stardom. A couple of them made it, but one of them had drug abuse and had a problem, and she wanted to be like them, and she actually, yes, she did. She became a star, but she lived for herself. And she wound up addicted to drugs, and years later on, this is her picture before she was found in her bathtub, overdosed and dead. She left a legacy. What was her legacy? Her daughter, at 21, also died of a drug overdose. You see, you can have Bethel, a house of God, when you live for the larger picture. When you say, look, it's not what's in it for me. When you recognize that God's blessing is the promises for which you live and appropriate in your lives, and you live for a blessing, you live for a larger vision. Or you could be like Whitney Houston, when you live for yourself, every moment for yourself, and you wind up with nothing. And that's a challenge for us today. And the only way you're going to make a difference between Bethel and Bethhaven is through that one dream, Jesus Christ. Take Him into your life. Live for Him. Desire Him. Let Him satisfy you. And you will live in Bethel. We'll just end with the last song. Can I have the team up, please? Yep. Rest, Lord Jesus, ruler of nature, thou of God, and when the sun
Thee will I cherish, Thee will I honor, Thou my soul's glory, joy, and crown. Praise the sunshine. Fair is the sunshine, fairer still the moonlight, and all the twinkling starry host. Jesus shines brighter, Jesus shines purer, than all the angels heaven can boast.
Let's meditate on the words. We bask under the brilliance of the sunshine. It lights our paths, clears our clouds, fills our lives with joy. We are enchanted by the moonlight. We're enthralled by the unimaginable splendor of the stars that adorn our night sky. And yet Jesus is brighter. Jesus shines purer than all the stars and angels the heavens can possibly muster, because He is that bridge. He is that staircase. He is that ladder. He comes into our empty, uninspired lives. He comes into our pain. He touches our soul and becomes our glory. Suddenly everything we treasure, everything we hope for, our ambitions, our dreams, our worries, our pains are all swept away because of who He is. You might be lying there on your hospital bed. I know some of you are, racked with pain. In the middle of the night, you're thinking about your divorce, or your marriage being torn apart by conflict, or you're perhaps wallowing in guilt because of your greed or your pain. You cannot see the glory, you cannot touch the glory in your heart, because every time your hands reach out and try to grasp this glory, it slips from you through your hands until Jesus comes into your life, and suddenly He is your glory, He is your joy. He fills the gap between what you are or where you are and where you want to be. There's only one bridge. There's only one staircase. There's only one link to the Father, and that's Jesus. It's because He took our place, our sin, our pain, and we took His glory into our lives. So let's sing of His glory.
Let us sing together. You are my soul's glory. We all raise our hands. You're my soul's glory. Oh, my soul's glory. You're my soul's glory, joy and crown. You're my soul's glory. You're my soul's glory. Oh, my soul's glory. Oh, you're my soul's glory, joy and crown. Beautiful Savior. Beautiful Savior,
Lord of all nations, Son of God and Son of Man, glory and